Good afternoon and welcome to another edition of Real Talks. I'm your host, David Steele, along with Kyle. How we doing, Kyle?
Doing great, David. Excited to talk about the movie today that we're about to
Yes.
talk about.
So, guys, you're not anybody. So, this is going to be coming out next week as part of our perfect movie series. So, you guys are going to have to wait a little bit. It will be released. So, as I said earlier, um, our perfect movie for March is, I think, hands down, one of the best films ever, ever made. It has, I think, arguably one of the top 25 scenes ever put on film, and that's Heat. And Heat is one of those movies that, and we're going to get into, I've got 5 points we're going to talk about to really drive home why this is a perfect movie. Um, so it's just an incredible film. So, but first, before we dive into it, what we're going to do is I'm going to give you a little bit of background about the film itself, some little nuggets and tidbits and everything else, and why it is a perfect movie. So, this film, as you may or may not know, was released in 1995. And actually, it's interesting, it was released December 15th of 1995. So right during the Christmas season. It's talk about a change of pace of feel good movies and average, average movies like that. This movie is, definitely not that. But nonetheless, so this movie is written and directed by Michael Mann. Um, I think, and I think Kyle will agree with me later on, is he's one of the most underrated directors out there. And so just to give you a little bit of financials about what, and you got to remember it was a different time back then. So this movie made, okay, $8.5 million its opening weekend. I mean, today it would be a disaster, but back then that wasn't bad. It opened to about 1,300 theaters, um, and actually won the box office. All told, ended up making 67 million here, domestic, and another 119 overseas. Um, and the other thing too is, I was looking at the financials. This is fascinating because, and I was telling this to Kyle off camera. Today, when you have a box office, a movie, let's say Cocaine Bear, because that's going to be coming out, or doing, coming out this week. Usually, you have your first initial, um, you have your initial box office, and then usually in a perfect world, what you're hoping for is that, um, it has between a, if you're lucky to have a 30 to 40% drop, it's um, it's great, right? So then, if you have a 50% drop, that's not bad. That's like Ant Man's probably going to have a 50% drop this weekend. So the reason I bring this up is because in the first week or two of this movie, okay, it dropped only 13%. And in its third week, went up 41%. Now, here's the caveat, it only went to another 16 theaters. So that tells you something. Um, so this, so now we have that. We know it was released. We know who wrote and directed it. Let me give you a little bit of the backstory. I think so. It has two of the greatest actors of probably the last 50 years, if not the last 50 years, the last 40 years. I mean, and that's Al Pacino and Robert De Niro. I mean, when you talk about greatness and every single superlative you can possibly imagine, those are the two men you think of, Al Pacino and Robert De Niro. But it wasn't just them. Take a listen to this stacked cast that they had. Val Kilmer, which, by the way, I mean, he had had his fame with Top Gun in 1986, and he had done some other things. So, John Voight, okay, he was a great actor for this. The late great Tom Sizemore. Okay, you had Amy Brenneman playing Edie, Neil's love interest. Ashley Judd, who either I think it was this year or the next year, she's going to come back and do. Um, one a great film with Denzel Washington. I know they did like two or three together. Okay, Ted Levine, who actually was in Silence of the Lambs, Dennis Haysbert, and you got to remember, guys, this is before 21 or 24. Okay, he had done this little small role. He had done other roles, but he wasn't the president yet. So that's when he really that was his breakout role. And I forgot one earlier, and thank you for reminding me, Kyle. And that was Natalie Portman. And Hank Azaria. I mean, Hank Azaria, of course, from The Simpsons. You know, his little role there. So
And Danny Trejo
yes,
playing the character named Trejo.
yeah. I mean, how yeah, right? So nonetheless, this was a phenomenal, phenomenal film. Um, he is so you've seen this. So tell our viewers, Kyle, how many times you've seen this, and
Ooh.
what do you think of the film?
Oh wow. That's a good question, David, because I I think I may have watched the end of Heat like 10 years ago, and I was captivated by the ending of that movie. I think it was a time period where, for some reason, as you would like channel hop on cable, I would discover the endings of movies. I actually discovered the ending of The Sixth Sense. I still haven't watched the full movie. I've only seen bits and pieces, but it's one of those situations where I just came across Heat one day, and I heard nothing but great things from it. In fact, I think I probably the first time I heard about it was when they would talk about, say, The Dark Knight, when they would talk about movies that were inspired by Heat and bank robbery films. When I was little, I loved bank robbery movies and the idea of bank robberies. I didn't want to rob a bank in real life, but I always thought that was so fascinating. And I remember when I saw the at least posters, or when I saw people talk about Heat, they'd always talk about how this movie has one of the greatest bank robberies of all time. I think I finally watched it in its entirety, I'd say about 7 years ago or something. It was around that time, because they actually re-released the film with a new remastered version. And that version I ended up owning on Blu-ray. I've seen it about two times after, and I think the movie is a masterpiece. It is, from beginning to end, incredibly well written, incredibly well acted, impeccably cast. I mean, you're talking about one actor in this film, Val Kilmer, who has had a number of great roles, whether you look at his portrayal of Jim Morrison in The Doors, whether you look at him in, of course, Top Gun, Tombstone. But in terms of his acting, this is arguably one of his best roles and performances. And he really, at times, is like the heart and soul of this film. Him and his relationship with Ashley Judd's Charlene. And you're also looking at a number of actors that kind of at the time were just starting out. So, as you mentioned, Dennis Haysbert, who he plays like a cook in this movie. He's not like the traditional role you're used to seeing. Like, as you mentioned, 24. He's usually like that government type of character, this authoritarian figure. But here he's a cook, and he's just trying to make ends meet. Then you have Danny Trejo, who I mentioned, who has a very small yet important part. And like, he is someone that now everyone knows who he is. I mean, if you go to Regal, you'll probably see him in the preview ads they do for, I think it was Pepsi. But for me, one of the most interesting roles in the film is Natalie Portman's role. Not just because she's one of my favorite actors, but this is really Natalie Portman post Leon the Professional, and she's starting to go for more of I, I mean, The Professional is an R-rated film, and it is like an adult movie in a sense where I mean, there's of course violence, and it's a film that is rooted in murder and all that. But what's interesting about Heat is she's playing a very troubled young girl, and it's a very small role. She only has like I think 3 scenes in the film, but like you can tell how big of a star she's going to become. She's going to become an Academy Award winning actress. And I love when you look at these older films and you see, I mean, it's funny I say older, but for a lot of people it's not that old, but still it's a film that is more than 20 years old, and it's fun to see these actors when they're starting out. But also at the same time, seeing actors like Robert De Niro and Al Pacino really still at the top of their game. And as we'll get to in this video, the cafe scene is just unbelievable. It is one of the most famous, moments in movies, and one of the most like what's the word for it? One of the most anticipated scenes because it's the first time you get to see these two talents really go at each other.
Yeah, no, it's just that scene itself, and we're going to get to that, as you said, in a couple minutes, and it's just the way he does it. You have two powerhouses, you have two titans, the immovable object against the unstoppable force, and
Yeah.
you think they're going to just clash, and the way he does it is genius. So here's what we're going to do, guys. Um, I have a list of 5 points that we're going to cover throughout this, and Kyle and I are basically going to tell you or exhibit to you why we believe this is a perfect movie. Um, I'll say it now, and I'll say it at the end of the video. I love hearing your feedback. So does he. Please leave your thoughts and your opinions and anything else you'd like to see down in the comment section, and we'll get back to you. Um, maybe this isn't the one you like from Al Pacino. Maybe you like Scarface better, or maybe De Niro's Godfather 2 is much better. We want to hear all your comments. But yeah, so seriously, take the time, spend a couple minutes, watch the video, obviously, and then give us your thoughts and comments. All right, so our first one, so the very first point I wanted to bring to the attention is a story. So the story and the character development. Now, we all see movies that are subpar. Let's face it, you know, and the major reason for that is because they don't have any character development. So at the beginning of this film, we're already thrust into it. Okay. Um, Within the first 10, 15 minutes, and this is really one of the inciting multiple things, okay, inciting incidences and everything else. They rob this truck, this armored truck. And um, I mean, just the mask itself is a hockey mask, or kind of scary. So they rob. Neil, played by Robert De Niro, had done some homework, knew the routes. They hit this truck. So when they hit the truck, they already know the response time of the police. So they have seismic charges and everything else, make them deaf. So they have a new um, crew member, and his name is Waingro. And Waingro is not acclimated to the way they work. And subsequently, so he believes that you know one of the officers is going to reach for his his pistol, and he shoots and kills him. And so that changes everything, right? Because it goes from robbery to murder. So they get out scot free, and at that point, so they go their separate ways, and a couple days later, or we go from that, okay, to Lieutenant Vincent Hanna, who's played by Al Pacino, and um, this is one of the storylines we'll be talking about in a couple of minutes. But so we go from De Niro actually doing that to um, to Vincent Hanna. And so at that point, what ends up happening is Hanna is now dealing with his own problems, right? And so we go, so we understand, we find out more through that. So we go back to Wayne Grove and we go back to Neil's crew in the scene in the trailer and the dynasty scene. And so basically he's saying, we got to kill this guy right now to get rid of him. And just as they're about to kill him, the cops, there's a police officer that rolls up at the red light, and then he turns around and leaves because he gets another call. So now Wayne Grove's in the wind. We don't know where he is. So not only does Neil have to dump the bearer bonds that they robbed and get the money for, now he has to deal with this other guy. And it's one of those things where that's the whole setup to the movie. And we get all of these different characters. So we're introduced to Chris. So after the robbery, they go and they have this little meeting. Okay. And Neil basically says, I have one more job to do and then I'm out of here. And so it's Chris and it's Danny Taco and it's, and then it's Tom Sizemore's character. And we find out a little bit more about each character in that meeting. Okay. We know that Chris has a kid, or we don't know that he has a child at this point, but we know that he has a girlfriend, you know, and so they agree that they're going to take the bank. And so he has to do a little bit of research and they all lay low. And so that's about the first 15 to 20 minutes of the film. So let me ask you this, Kyle. What did you think about the story and the development of all of the characters that you had? Because you had about 6 or 7 characters you're trying to juggle in the story, by the way.
I think what's really great about Heat is the fact that every character is different. That is something that I think Michael Mann did a really incredible job at painting these characters and showing a character that is like Wangro, who is such a unhinged animal that they let loose basically, and he isn't a guy that they are familiar with. And Macaulay is a very organized, thorough criminal, and it's why he hasn't gotten caught, and he refuses to get caught because, as he says that infamous quote where it's like, never attach yourself if you can't walk away from it for like 4 seconds. I butchered it, but
So,
it's
so
like that.
basically, so the scene that you're referring to, okay, it's in the coffee shop scene, and so we're gonna get to that scene in particular in a minute. So, and the backstory behind that is so fascinating. Anyways, so Macaulay had said to Hannah that somebody told me once, never never do never have something that you can walk out on in 30 seconds flat if you
Hmm.
spot the heat around the corner. And of course, that's where we get heat. And so basically, he's saying that you don't if you can you have to have zero attachments, right? You don't have to have anything that you can't walk out on in 30 seconds flat if you spot the heat around the corner. Because it's one of those things where they're wanted men and they can set up and do all these things, but it's a matter of time. And eventually time's gonna run out. So I'm sorry, I didn't mean to hijack your thing
No,
there,
no, no.
but yeah, so
Please,
that's
thank
go
you.
for it.
Yeah, that was a quote because I knew I messed that entire thing up. But yes, like that is what's so captivating about Macaulay, because in this story we see him basically struggling with that idea when he meets the character of Edie, this girl that he starts to fall for, and he realizes that maybe this isn't the life that he wants to lead for the rest of his life. Maybe he actually has found somebody that he can actually settle down with. And at the same time, you have Hannah, Al Pacino's character, and he is a guy that really, the job has just consumed him. This, as you'll see, this case, it consumes him as a man. It consumes his soul to the point where he becomes so attached to this case that he isn't, able to really have a good relationship with his wife, Justine. Or, I mean, he tries his best with his stepdaughter, but it's still kind of, you know, something that this man is trying to make ends meet, but at the same time, the job is getting in the way. And it's a really great juxtaposition of these two characters in Hannah and Macaulay, because it's like they're both magnetic and they're both being drawn to each other, but they both want, in a way, to go, uh, other a separate path, but they can't help but get involved. And that's what happens at the end of this film, where Macaulay, almost like, he's at the very end of his rope. He's like, I'm going to leave with Edie. I don't, need this life anymore. I'm Nate. John Voight's character has set me up and I'm going to be able to get out. But then he finds out what happens to his buddy, and he finds out that Wangro is responsible for all this. He goes to kill him, and because of that act, because of, in a way, his own, you can call it selfishness, but also his idea of trying to protect, his crew, it gets to this point where he's like, oh wait, now I have to protect myself. I have to protect Edie, because if I don't, then they will come after me. And because of that choice he has to make at the end, it leads to his death. And then Hannah is also at the end of this film stuck with the idea that, oh well, I can't be with Justine. Like, this case is eating me out, and like, I just can't leave from this case. And I forget, there's like a specific line that Justine says to him, but he is once again drawn to the case by the end of the movie, and then he kills Macaulay. And it's like, there's this moment in their death, in Macaulay's death, when he just holds his hand, and it's, I think, one of the most humanizing moments of any crime film ever, where, like, the guy at the end of the barrel isn't just a criminal. He is a human being with his own, morals and his own goals. And to see two men, despite them being on the opposite sides of the fence, they are still able to connect in that moment. It's one of the most beautiful scenes in movies.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's just it's so one of the things too is so Hannah, even when the scene when Hannah goes to so he there's a murder of a young girl, about a 16-year-old girl. And so you see that, you know, the mother shows up. And so he's comforting the mother because, he knows that no child should ever be killed before their parents, especially in a violent manner. And Wingro was the culprit. And so he plays more of a deeper role as the film goes on. So, and by the way, this is a 3 hour film. You got to understand something too, guys. This is before this is before the 3 hour film was really a thing, right? I mean, we have all these films today that are 3 hours long, whether it's Babylon, whether it's Avengers Endgame, whether it's Avatar: The Way of Water, all these films. This was 3 hours, and you really saw the act breaks. But the whole first act, okay, was all about setting up for later on. Michael Mann wanted you to care about the characters, whether it's Chris, whether it's, Ashley Judd's character, whether it's, Vincent Hanna, whether it's Macaulay, whether whoever it is. Because as we go to act two, okay, about an hour in, um, and look, every film has to have a a uh, a scene where the villain and the protagonist or the hero are in the same room. They meet. I mean, I'm thinking one right off the top of my head. It's not the best example, but Quantum of Solace, right? When Bond's at the opera. And so what you end up seeing is by this visuals are stunning anyways, but it's one of those things where um, you see Green come in and Bond and Green just lock eyes and then, so that's one. This scene is arguably one of the and by the way, we're just starting to go into act 2 now. So it's not like we're too deep in the movie. And this is probably as far as I'm concerned, it's one of the top 25 scenes ever put on film. And there is so much backstory behind it. It's amazing. But so the second the second major point. Okay, well, let's get to what I was going to say, and then we'll get to the second point. So this scene here we were just talking about, the coffee shop scene. It's I, there's nothing else to say, but it was amazing. Um, so I did a little digging to find out. So it was really like so they didn't actually start shooting this until after lunch, which by their terms was about 1:30 in the morning. So um, and they, Michael Mann is a very meticulous director. He likes things done. You only get a one time right, um, that one magical moment, so to speak. And what ends up happening is that it was most of it, okay, was taken from take 12. Now, the story goes from Michael Mann that um, they were originally going to do a a two shot. So a two shot. This is so in movie terms, this is a two shot. You have two people in front of the camera. Okay. So he was setting it up, and the DP was looking at it, and so they did a couple takes, and they're like, I don't really like it too much. So they only went to your average over the shoulder. And what ended up happening was you captured more emotion that way. You captured
Yeah.
more, visceral, just they were playing off each other. I mean, De Niro and Pacino, they're the best of friends today because of a lot of reasons, but one of them, and even Michael Mann was saying this back then, is they were playing off each other.
Hmm.
So, for example, when one would lean forward, the other would lean back. Or when one would tilt his head one way, the other would tilt his head the other way. And there was always that play there. And the reason why this scene works, okay, amongst other reasons, is you get 9 minutes of backstory between two characters, between Neil McCauley and Lieutenant Vincent Hanna. 9 minutes of them going back and forth, and you're getting the whole backstory. You
Yeah.
find out that McCauley was in uh, Alcatraz. You find out that Vincent Hanna has gone through a couple marriages. And it's one of those things where the writing is so clean and so tight and so swift. It's amazing. And they even talk about dreams. Like, so Neil talks about the one dream where he's drowning, okay? And not having, we were going back to this, what you were talking about when he meets Edie, not having enough time because he's not doing all of the things that he wants to do. And on the flip side of the coin, you have Hannah, who says, I spend all my time chasing guys like you around the block. How am I supposed to have a marriage? Okay. His dream is he's at this large table, and all of the victims he's ever had have 8-ball hemorrhages because they find them 2 weeks under the bed and they don't say anything. And that's the dream. And you just see, the death, so to speak, in that moment. And that's a whole thing for foreshadowing. Um, just unbelievable. Unbelievable. Now that you've seen this X amount of times and you hear all the stories behind it, give me your thoughts, Kyle, on the coffee shop scene.
Well, what should also be noted is I don't even think you mentioned this at the top, David, but this film is inspired by a true story.
Yes.
And what's interesting is this coffee shop or cafe incident actually did happen between these two real life people. There was a real life Neil McCauley. The real life Vincent Hanna was another name. I think it was like Adamson or something like that. And it was a story about these two guys. One was a detective, the other one was or I think one was a police officer, the other one was a criminal. And they met one day over a cup of coffee or something on that order. And it's such a fascinating sequence for a crime film because just, him rolling up to him saying, "Hey, let's get a cup of coffee." Like,
Yeah,
it's not,
and by the way, that's a meme, but also it's one of those things too. And we're not even talking. We're going to get to this in a couple minutes. How Michael Mann uses Los Angeles as a set, the setting of this
yeah.
as a whole character, and the way he rolls up is he finds out what car he's in, he finds out the tail, and he goes and he tails the guy and he pulls him over. And of course, you see, Macaulay with his hand on the gun. He's like, "Hey, how are you? Want to get a cup of coffee?" So this is the end result. And the other thing behind the scene is you have two behemoths. You have two powerhouses. Okay. You have two of arguably the best actors in the world.
Yes.
And you think, oh God, this is going to be serious fireworks. What do? They sit down and they have a cup of coffee. It completely diffuses it. As you were talking about, which makes the later on portion that much better, they humanize it. And so he says, "Well, what do you want? Ball barbecues and ball games?" He's like, "Yeah." But it's one of those things where it's all humanized. I'm sorry, continue. I just
Yeah,
this
no,
but
but
see, this is the passion I have and he has for the film. Go ahead.
that's it. Like, it's so unexpected for the film because when you're watching the film, you just think, "Oh, it's just going to be this shootout between these two characters." And the way that man portrays this scene, it's like if you take this scene out of the context of this movie, you just be like, "Wait a second. Wow, like what type of movie is this?" And then you watch it in the grand context of the film, it really makes the ending of the film that much more moving because you do now know that these characters have met each other. Most, criminal gangster films or any type of movie where it has to deal with a detective or a police officer chasing a guy, they don't usually meet until like the end of the movie. So the fact that you're having them meet in the second act and you're having this conversation, it it is so great, and especially the way that they act in it. It is like one of the most iconic scenes in movies because I mean, you're talking about, as you said, two behemoths, two of the biggest actors of their time in a scene together where there isn't a two shot, but you still, you can't help but be drawn to the screen. And oh man, I really love the way that Pacino plays it too, because I mean, Pacino's great in every movie. Every movie I've seen, I've never seen him give a bad performance. Even in Jack and Jill, he's the best part of Jack and Jill. Dunkachino. But I mean, when we're talking about this movie, though, he is so. I
I mean,
mean,
even for
I,
me,
I I believe he said that he actually did cocaine when he was making this movie
yeah,
because
I don't doubt
that
it.
was the point of the
Um,
role. Like he his character was a guy he believed to be doing coke, and in those scenes that you see him in, I think he says like in order for him to get there, to get to the amount of energy he has to get to, that's real. That's not just
yeah,
acting.
no, and I mean, I for me, one of his greatest roles. It's not the Godfather. It's the Devil's Advocate, right? The last
Yes.
15 minutes of the Devil's Advocate.
Oh
I
my
love
god.
that movie, but nonetheless, it just goes to show you. So you have these two guys that are absolute just kings, gods of what they're doing. So we go from very subtle, we go from very slow to when it starts to pick up. And it goes from 0 to 60 in no time. So what ends up happening is he goes back to the police station and, you know, um, so he walks in and one of his, fellow officers says, they dumped us. What? And he says, what? They dumped all of our surveillance.
Mm-hmm.
They went into, LAX, which, we don't have any flight patterns we can't go into. He's like, I just had Macaulay with, you know, I just had coffee with Macaulay a half hour ago. And they dumped all of our surveillance. And he basically says, does anybody know where these people are? And what ends up happening is the setup to Act Two. They get all the schematics. He talks to one of the
Nate.
characters that has it. And so they said, okay, are you ready? And so we should say this too, that not Neil, Vincent had been pressing one of his CIs about some information, and he comes up with Slick. And then he's like, whoa, 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 where did you get that? So tell me more about Slick. Of course, he's talking about Wingrove. So nonetheless, he gets it. So immediately after the so one of the proxy officers comes in and says, were you guys looking into a CI named Benny? And he was talking about that. So what ends up happening is they were looking at this bank and they're like, oh shit, we got to go now. So, of course, that's the scene where we go from 0 to 60. They go and rob the bank. So Hannah gets all of his crew and they go and they stop very, like 7, 8 blocks out because they want to make sure that they're not seen. And so they're running and everything else with the machine guns. And so this goes into my second point of authenticity. So once again, you have Michael Mann who loves story, that loves doing it. And what does he do? He has these guys, and it was all different training. It was different training for Val Kilmer to Robert De Niro to Al Pacino, and they have them train with these machine guns and these assault weapons. And we're gonna go into arguably, I think, the best shootout ever put on screen for as long as it was put on screen. And so I will put the link in the description if I can find the video, the YouTube video. But it talks all about how they went through the training, and even the stars talk about it themselves. And it is unbelievable. Even one of the SWAT officers was kidding. He's like, "Yeah, these guys could, you know, cycle through these things better than we could, and we're professionals." But it's one of those things where, and you brought it up to me earlier. How did they not get nominated for sound? Because what
Yeah.
Michael Mann did, okay, is he used Los Angeles as not only a setting, but he used the skyscrapers as echoes. So it was
Mm.
louder. And when you see these guys just shooting and shooting and shooting and so that's our shootout. That is our shootout. And we basically go, I'm guessing, for about 10 minutes. And so what ends up happening is um, it's just one of the most remarkable shootouts you'll see. Now, a couple of quick backstory things. They meet in the diner. Okay. They were training at Trejo to dump these cops. He can't. He calls them. Neil calls him back on the landline. Says, "Hey, I can't dump him. I don't want to lead him to you." So he's out. He's out of the picture at this point. So then Dennis Haybert's character, which you were talking about, the short order cook. So Neil goes back and says, "Hey, what's going on?" And he's trying to get his life together. And he has a girlfriend who says he's proud of him, but doesn't. He can't figure it out at this point. He's like, "Look, I got a job for you. Remember the signals?" He's like, "Of course I remember the signals. Are you cool?" He's like, "I'm always cool." He's like, "Okay, one answer. I need right now, 5 minutes around the back." And he's like, "All right, fuck it, let's go." And so he dumps it, and he goes in and he becomes a driver for this. And when this shootout happens, he's like, doing his thing. Eventually, he gets killed, but it's one of those things where it's, there's so many moving parts to this. And so the shootout happens right before they get to the bank. And it's just, yeah. So talk to me about the shootout. Talk to me about the sound. Talk to me about what you think it was really all about and how they did.
Well, for me, my favorite film, it's tied usually, but one of my favorite films of all time is The Dark Knight. And the opening of The Dark Knight has so many influences by Heat, the bank robbery itself, the way it's shot, to the point where William Fichtner, who plays Van Zant from Heat, is actually in The Dark Knight as the bank manager in the bank.
Do you know who you're robbing? Go ahead. I'm sorry. No,
Exactly,
by the
yes.
way, the last thing I'll say is this. We're doing Heat right now for March, either April or May. We will be doing The Dark Knight as part of our perfect movie series. So stay tuned for that. So I'm sorry. Go ahead, Kyle.
Yeah, but I know that, like, when I was watching Heat, I was just seeing that, oh wow, like this bank robbery, just the way that they're walking across the um desks, I believe, the way they just move in the way that it's shot, it's almost, not shot for shot, but very akin to what they did with The Dark Knight. But then you have the sound design, the sound of the guns is just so loud and so, I think, well designed. It's something that you clearly, I mean, today, we've seen a lot of talk, even from James Cameron lately, where you talk about how kind of afraid some directors are of now using gun violence in movies. But here, like, this was before that. This was in the 90s, and they went all in on it, like Die Hard and this. And you get to this scene in this movie where they're just ripping it up, and you're just seeing this city and you're hearing the sounds, and it's this all out warfare scene, and it is so exciting and suspenseful. To my recollection, I haven't watched Heat in a couple months, but I, I, I don't think there's a score there at that moment. Is there, David? Do you remember if there's a score
No,
in that
no, there
scene?
isn't because what Michael Mann wanted to do is he wanted to make you really be immersed in it, and he felt like, and I would imagine, I don't know this to be true or false, but I imagine any kind of score, any kind of music would have taken away from the intensity,
Yeah.
because don't forget, we just went from a very slow, dissected talking two guys talking across the table to 0 to 60. We're
Yes.
blasted away. And so that juxtaposition there really
Yeah.
worked. And I think
Exactly.
that any sort of music would have hampered that.
And it's not to say that. See, what's fun about Heat is I actually own the soundtrack of Heat, and it's a very interesting soundtrack. It's a soundtrack made up of various artists, from Moby to um I think the Kronos Quartet, I believe. Like, there's a number of different artists on Heat, that even the score by Elliot Goldenthal, you have like so many different elements in this movie. But in a scene like that, which is, I guess you could say, scoreless, it's something that really immerses you in that moment. And you're getting to this scene in the movie where, when Chris gets shot, like that one moment where you see that bullet come and it hits him, you're like, oh snap. You feel the stakes in this scene.
and that's you
And when
hit the nail
Tom's,
right
I
on the
think
head.
Tom Sizemore gets shot in that scene too, and
Yeah, no,
you're like,
you're right.
damn.
And that you hit the nail right on the head with that word of stakes. So the whole first act, what Michael Mann does is give you, not only does he give you character development, but he gives you stakes. He makes you say, okay, this is what these guys are, and this is how they're going to roll. So the stakes, when they knock over a um an armored car in the first 10 minutes of the film, you're like, okay, there's some serious stakes here. And they're even getting bigger and bolder. When they knock over that bank, you're like, oh my God. So when Chris does get shot, it changes everything. And it's one of those things that I would argue not only is the best shootout, it's the best 15 minutes in cinema because you have everything. And it's remarkable.
And I think, I mean, it even that's one thing about the film. It escalates in that sequence, and you get to that point where I think what's it, Tom Sizemore grabs the little
Hmm.
child and starts to run, and then you're like, oh, wait a second, now this is getting even more intense because before it was, I mean, an all-out war between the police officers and bank robbers, but now it's like now we're talking about a child's life at stake, and that's that's when you have a great action sequence because it reminds me of another perfect movie that we discussed on here, Captain America the Winter Soldier. And like even that sequence in Captain America the Winter Soldier when Nick Fury's in the SUV car and like he's driving through the streets and the Winter Soldier's there, you're like, "Oh, wait. This could have, really huge implications for the character." I mean, a lot of people when that scene was shown in theaters, a lot of people weren't that shocked by it because I mean, there are many people that think that he would have lived given the trailers. It didn't matter,
Right.
but like if you watch that movie for the first time without seeing trailers, that scene is very exciting, even more so than in theaters because now you are wondering, what's going to happen. And that's the same with Heat. Like number of scenes in this movie are so intense, but one of the reasons why they are so intense is because you care about the characters on screen and the characters themselves. As I wrote on my letterbox review, I said in my last rewatch of Heat, every single character of this movie has a story to tell. And I said, like, I feel like you could make a movie about Danny Trejo's character.
Hmm.
You can make a movie about Natalie Portman's, Hank Azaria's, like any of the characters in this movie, you can literally make a film about because they are that complex. And it's not, you know, a movie like you were saying before where you have a subpar film with very little character development, very little depth. This is a movie that feels like a lived in world. And when you get to this banks robbery sequence, when you get to them running in the streets, shooting at the police, the sounds, the
It's
skyscrapers, it feels like you were there. It feels like this real immersive experience.
and that is going to lead us into our third point. And so it's an important point because one thing that Michael Mann does and a lot of is he loves to use setting as a character, and this is no different. He and I were talking off camera. We were talking about Collateral. Um, Collateral is one of those films that is just, and by the way, another Michael Mann film, remarkable. For me personally, this is his master class, but Collateral is right up there. But he uses Los Angeles as a setting, and he uses it as a backdrop.
Mm-hmm.
And it's one of those things where, whether it's the very opening where you have that subway going through the smoke, or whether it's the chopper scene, where you see the chopper come in and whatever else, it's an amazing display of how you use Los Angeles. And it's amazing. And the other thing too, I mean, believe it or not, this was made, what I say only This was made on only a $60 million budget. And you go, wow, that's not bad. No, it isn't. Because they shot it all in one city.
Yeah.
They didn't go to Amsterdam. They didn't go to
Uh-huh.
Prague. They didn't go to, I mean, so it was one of those things where it's an amazing display of how he uses the city and what he uses for the city. Um, just remarkable, just absolutely remarkable. And some of the, I mean, as I said, Collateral is another example. You see a lot of drone shots or helicopter shots of the cab going at night. You have the dark against the yellow cab, and this is the same thing. You don't have the driving per se, but you have the whole setting. So let me ask you this, Kyle. What did you think about Michael Mann using Los Angeles as a setting and making it essentially another character?
Oh, it's just beautiful, and I think I don't know the name of the DP, whoever did the cinematography for this film, but it is one of the most visually striking films in movie history, really, because you're talking about a lot of these shots. Like, there's this one shot that's iconic where it's just Macaulay looking out, his window, his at the
And it's
skyline, and
interesting, yeah. So it's interesting you bring that up. That's this shot here, and it's an amazing, amazing shot, and um,
yes,
that's the shot that you're
ugh,
referring to, and
ugh, oh my god,
it's so amazing. And here's the thing too. So this is after he gets home and Ashley Judd character throws him out and he comes over and they're talking or whatever else. And so here's the thing. Another Michael Mann film was Miami Vice. I love Miami Vice. It's not, and by the way, I know I'm gonna get off topic here. Bear with me. Michael Mann created Miami Vice. Sonny Crockett and everything else. He created that whole world. Edward James Olmos, and it was one of the first times too that he had an African American, um, an African American officer paired with a Caucasian officer, and this is the mid 1980s. Completely different. You're in Miami. The reason why they had to cut it is because cut it short is because it was just too expensive to make. I digress because I say this. Here's the thing: in the scene in the film Miami Vice, there is a scene where they're actually, it could have been the same place, I don't know, but there is a scene where they actually um, are talking to one of the characters, and so it kind of goes dark, not dark, but it's like you're in within yourself, surreal moment, and then it comes out of it very quickly. Nonetheless, the silhouette shot was amazing, and his um, he uses Los Angeles as a backdrop, and it's just
yeah.
amazing to see how it's done. Um, it's just amazing. So now let's move on to. I mean, so everybody that let's move on to. We're going to quickly talk about the ending, and then the third act, and then we're going to move on to our fourth point. So
Oh,
the
David,
ending of the film,
my
the
my
ending of the
phone's
film.
almost out of battery soon, so
Okay, no, okay. Um, so the ending of the movie, and what you were talking about,
yes.
actually humanizes everybody, right? So basically, is it going to, um, what is Neil going to do? Is he going to go back to his ways, or is he going
Hmm.
to be selfish about it and do that? And so once Hannah is right, like hot on his tails,
Yeah,
they decide to pick up and leave. And on the way, so Nate had already given him an out.
yeah.
And so he's like, okay, I've got one last stop to make. And he decides to take, friendship and loyalty over anything else. And he kills Wingrove. In that reaction, what he does is there's a chase that ensues.
Hmm.
And so from that chase, we see one of the final shots is they're near the airport. The lights are there. and he gets shot. And what you were talking about is
Yep.
that basically he not only shoots him, but he goes over to comfort him as he's dying. Um, just a remarkable thing. Now, the reason why he gets on his tail, as we were talking about earlier, is because he actually so Ashley Judd's character is actually having an affair with Hank Azaria's character. They go press him, they get her, and so what ends up happening is, long story short, they were going to try and get Chris, and basically she's like, no, don't do it. You're going to go into a trap. They stop him at the end of the street. He's clean, and Chris gets away scot free. Um, so it's one of those things where, so we're going to be wrapping up here in a couple of minutes, but wanted to ask you a couple quick questions. Number one, longevity of the film. What did you think about the longevity and how it's done? Okay, and how it's been over the course of time. So that's your first question. So what do you think about the longevity of the film? Has it aged well? I guess is the question.
Um, is this one of your points? Is this one
Yeah,
of your
yeah. The longevity of it. So how do you think
which
this film has aged over the course of the 25, 30 years?
I think it's just aged perfectly. I even wrote in a review how I thought that the film is timeless. Like if you watch this film, there are very little, I think, elements of the film that have necessarily aged. Like, if you're watching a movie like, say, I don't know, the Emoji Movie, let's just pull one
Mm-hmm.
out of a hat. That's a film that has aged the minute it was released. Um, you have a movie. This Some of the best films of all time are films that, when you watch them today, you can truly still connect to it, and it truly feels like it's in its own world, like its own time, that it's timeless essentially. So you are watching this movie, and I think today, the remaster may have helped in a way, I guess, but it's a movie that you watch. It has inspired so many other films. It is a film that has some of the best characters in a crime drama, and it's a film that really humanizes, I think, the idea of both those committing crimes and those seeking out those that are committing crimes, because, as I was mentioning earlier, at the end of the day, Hannah's like destroying himself by going after Macaulay, but it's like the only thing he knows how to do. And
Well, and
Macaulay,
that's to your point. That's where he says when they're having this talk at the coffee shop, he's like, that's all I know how to do.
yeah,
And he's like, I know that's all all I know how to do is take scores. It's like, oh,
exactly.
that's all I knew how to do too, is to stop guys
And
like you.
Macaulay is like basically stuck in this life, and this is the only thing he knows how to do. So, and I think another great point about this movie that I don't think a lot of people mention is it's a movie where Hannah is slowly falling out of love with his wife as Macaulay is falling in love with Edie. And I think
That's a
that's
great
a
pickup.
really, really cool parallel in this film, because you're seeing a man that, I mean, Hannah, this isn't his first wife, too. Like, he
This is
is a
his
man
third.
that, this is his third wife. This is not a man that has had great luck when it comes to marriages. And it's actually pretty crazy to me how, and pretty, I think, fascinating when it comes to Hannah's character, that the best relationship he has in this film is with Natalie Portman's Lauren character, his stepdaughter, because she goes to his hotel apartment that he's at to attempt suicide, but she knows that he's going to be there. And that's why she goes there. And I think she says to herself that, maybe he'll be able to save me if I go there. And I think that's a really, really underrated aspect of the film, because you're seeing a man that, at the end of the day, Hannah is a hero. You know, he's a guy that's trying to do the right thing, and other people do see him that way, but then he's unable to keep his marriage together. He's
Well,
unable
what
to,
does it
you
say?
know.
What is the what is one of the lines that the Joker says in The Dark Knight? He says, "You live long enough to be a hero, or they consider you a villain."
Yeah,
I
well,
mean, it's
watch
one of those
yourself.
things where,
Yeah,
it's an unbelievable. And the other thing I would say to you, and I'm going to wrap this up in a couple minutes, is but the juxtaposition which you were talking about is like A Star Is Born too, the
yeah,
2018 version. You had Jackson Maine, who was an alcoholic to start,
hmm,
and then he finds Allie, and he's slowly starting to go down, and she's slowly starting to go up.
yep.
So there's that juxtaposition there. So, okay, so what we are on our last point, and this one is can be debated, and I'm going to let Kyle take the lead on this because I'm not too privy on this, although I have started. So, one of the biggest questions we all talk about is
Oh
sequels.
yes.
Um, should they make one? Should they not make one? Do you think it's worth it? Heat is a perfect movie. It just is. I mean, we've discussed it here for the last hour, and you guys can go back and read up all this stuff. So Michael Mann, and by the way, Michael Mann had always said there were more stories beyond it. So what ended up happening was Michael Mann collaborated with somebody, and they wrote a book, Heat Two. Now, as we all know, sequels never do well better than the originals when the originals are that good. Um, so here's my question to you, Kyle. As we wrap this up, number one, does it need a sequel? Does it need one? And number two, would you see Heat 2 in theaters? And I'll with the other caveat, what did you think of the book? Because you've gotten through it. I'm about a third of the way through it. What did you think of the book Heat 2?
I enjoyed myself reading this book. I thought it was really interesting to see the backstories of a number of the characters from the film. The book serves as both a prequel and a sequel. So it's in a way kind of like The Godfather Part 2. But what's really interesting about the book is it tends to focus itself around the character of Chris, played by Val Kilmer. And this character is, you know, as I said, most of the characters in Heat are so complex you can make a movie or tell a story about any of them. But what I really love about Chris is he's the character, and one of my favorite scenes of the film itself is when he tries to leave and his I thought, was she his wife or his girlfriend? One of the other Ashley
She
Judd's
might be his
characters.
she might be his wife. I thought
I
they were.
forget,
Yeah, go
but
ahead.
Charlene, she like waves him away and gives him the tip off to
Mm-hmm.
leave, and it's such a great moment in the movie that I remember when you're reading the book. It's something that like him and Charlene, their relationship is a very huge element in the story, and you get to see in the book when they met. You get to see what he liked about her. You get to see what happens to these characters after the events of Heat, and you get to see a very interesting storyline revolving around Hannah and a past case that he did prior to Heat One that ends up continuing in the sequel. And it's a pretty great book, written by Meg Gardner and also by Michael Mann, who came up with some of the story. Basically, I I think the movie would be very interesting though, because I keep on thinking that Austin Butler would make a great Chris, especially, you know, a young version of Chris. And, you know, if Michael Mann wants to, you know, make this film, I think Austin Butler would be perfect. Now, I don't know who they would get to play, say, a Macaulay, who they would get to play a younger Hannah, um, but I think I've heard I think even Al Pacino wants Timothy Chalamet to play himself when he was younger. But I would totally be down to see a film of this. But it'd be interesting to me how they would do the sequel portion of the novel, because of course, you know, with Val Kilmer, how do you, do that? That is a big question I have on where they're going with that storyline. But I mean, if you asked me, does Heat need a sequel? I don't know, but I will say that I thought this book was a pretty investing novel, and I hope that you get to finish it at some
Oh
point
no, I
because I
have to,
think
and I
you
will.
will
It's
you
on
will
my
enjoy
desk.
the film. I mean, not the film. The book has a sequence at the end, like this highway sequence that is like just another example of Michael Mann's, you know, master
His ability to actually write.
master ability to make action sequences and to come up with action sequences, because this is like rivals the bank robbery sequence, and if we see it on film it's going to be something else.
Yeah.
So I can't wait for if they end up making it. We don't know if
Yeah.
sometimes movies don't go through, but
So yeah, I mean, so my thoughts on this is this: sometimes it's one of those things where you don't need a sequel. I mean, the last movie I can think of off the top of my head that they were debating about whether a sequel should have been made or not was the Joker. Um, does it need a sequel? Does it not? Well, I would
yeah.
only say this: if the story is rich and is good as this movie, absolutely do it, hands down. And you're gonna get all these other fan casting. I mean, you were talking about Austin Butler playing Chris, and it's like that's cool. I like it. I think, but it has to fit what it is. And so I I don't know. I mean, it would be fascinating. I mean, the minute they announce that, and by the way, Michael Mann can make any movie he wants. Any movie he wants. All he's got to do is pick up the phone to an executive and be like, "Hey, I want to make Heat 2." Done. It's 50 million bucks. But it's one of those things where it's I don't know. I'm in your camp because I don't know. It's so perfect. It's so good that you think that, well, anything that is made might detract from it. So I don't know. I mean, you're talking about bigger budgets. You're talking about, bigger things. I don't know. I mean, I like it the way it is. Um, Sometimes you just need to leave perfection the way it is. Yeah. So, guys, yeah, that's it. That's Heat. That's our perfect movie for March. Um, we could gush about this for another hour, and a half. But the thing is so what we did and what we're going to do for you every single one of these perfect movies is we're going to walk through 4 or 5 points that really drive home the um the film itself and why it is, whether it is, the coffee shop scene, you know whether it is, one of these other scenes that really, you know, is there like that, or whether it's the setting, or, whether it's a simple shot like the silhouette shot. They're all going to be there. And so what we're going to do, so this is going to come out the 1st of March. I've already, done that. So, yeah, guys, thank you very much. Um, as I said in the beginning of the video, I'll reiterate it again. Please hit that like and subscribe button and leave your comments about Heat. Um, because I love the movie and he loves the movie, and it's one of those things where we can talk about this all day long. So, let me give you a little bit of quick rundown of what's coming up. I have to sit down before the end of the month and watch Fargo. I'm going to actually probably do that on my own. In the beginning of March, we all next week, we're going to dedicate that to Creed week. So we're going to be doing Creed, Creed 2, and Creed 3. I'm going to go see Creed 3 probably on Friday. So we are going to be doing the spoiler cast on Saturday. That is the 4th. Um, Coming up, we've got a ton of stuff. So not only do we have Creed, but we do have The Mandalorian. And I'm going to be sitting down to watch the first season of The Mandalorian today. So we're going to be doing The Mandalorian. Um, we have so this is going to be coming up. So we have another episode of The Last of Us. This is going to be left behind um, this week. So we're going to be getting all the backstory between Riley and Ellie finally, and then um, March 1st, The Mandalorian drops. We're going to be doing a spoiler cast for The Mandalorian. Like I said, the first couple weeks are going to be kind of crazy. We're going to be doing Creed Week. So we've already had Quantumania. So March 3rd, we have um, Creed 3. All the reviews right now have been unbelievable for this movie. I can't wait to see it. I have to sit down and watch Creed 2. I'm going to sit down and watch Creed for sure. Um, and that's going to be great. Then we have, I mean, there are other films coming out between now and May, but these are the ones we're going to be doing spoiler cast for. Um, May 5th, we've got Guardians of the Galaxy, which is going to really start the summer and blow the socks off everybody. Um, This is going to be James Gunn's final entry into this before he really takes over what he's going to do at DC. Um, we've got Across the Spider Verse, Spider Man Across the Spider Verse, June 2nd. Now, truth be told, I have to see the first one. That is on my May. That is going to be for May. Um,
You're gonna love it.
the uh, first reactions. So I'm going to sit down and watch that so I can go right into it. And a lot of people say, and I say a lot, not everybody, this is easily within their top 3 Spider-Man movies of all time. You've got No Way. A lot of people will put No Way Home in there. They'll put Spider-Man 2 in Across the Spider-Verse, or Into the Spider-Verse, I should say. So that's one.
Yeah.
June's going to be packed. We've got Rise of the Beast, which I'm eagerly looking forward to. I mean, it's going to be a fun movie. It's going to be fun for what it is. One of the most anticipated movie, if not the most anticipated movies of the year, is June 16th in The Flash. We've got our second trailer. Yeah. I just did a story about that the other day. Anna Machete, you know, so it's actually going to be premiered at Comic Con in April. That's how confident they are. And Machete is now developing an It prequel series for HBO Max. Go guys, go check that out. But yeah, I think that's going to be fun, fun, fun. We've got at the end of the month, we've got Indiana Jones: The Dial of Destiny, $297 million. I can't wait to see Harrison Ford back. Harrison Ford back as Indiana Jones. And then July, we have, I think, probably the biggest movie this summer, and that's Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning Part One. $250 million budget. It's just, uh, it's going to be amazing. And then the last one we're going to do a spoiler cast for is Oppenheimer. That's going to be the 21st. And the one that I don't have here pictured is Barbie. So that is going to be coming out the same day as Oppenheimer. So we'll see how that really uh, does, and we'll take care of that. So, yeah, I don't know. I guess that's it. I think I've got everything. So, as I said, we've got a ton of stuff coming up on the channel for you guys. What I would say is this: like that little ticker says, hit that like, hit that subscribe button. Follow Kyle on Twitter. His screen name is at Arking Kyle. You can just do the little search and you'll find him. That is my Twitter. Um, and yeah, guys, shoot your questions in, shoot your comments in about this video or any of the other videos that you've seen, and hit that subscribe button because we've got a ton of stuff coming up for you this year. Okay, so for Kyle, I'm David, and you have been watching Perfect Movies on Real Talks. Bye bye, guys.
Bye.